Before the arrival of Europeans, the Americas were not a new world at all. They, in fact, were ancient homelands for millions of people. Around Cahokia, which is near present day St. Louis, enormous earthen mounds rose against the skyline, which was evidence of the Mississippian culture's engineering skills and hierarchical society. At its height around the year 1100 CE, Cahokia may have housed 20,000 people or more, which was larger than London at the same time. To the south, in the Valley of Mexico, the Aztec Empire ruled from its magnificent capital, which was a city built on an island with gleaming causeways and canals. By 1500, it held perhaps 200,000 inhabitants, twice the size of any European city. Their neighbors, the Maya, had already developed complex written languages, mathematics, and astronomy centuries before while in the Andes, and the Inca Empire stretched over 2,500 miles of mountainous terrain, linked by roads and bridges that astonished Spanish conquerors when they arrived. In North America, it was just as diverse. The Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast forged vast political alliances. The Pueblo peoples of the Southwest lived in adobe homes and relied on irrigation to farm maize in the desert climates. Across the continent, societies reflected their environments. Hunter-gatherers on the plains, fishing communities in the Pacific Northwest, and agricultural villages in the Mississippi River Valley. However, across the Atlantic, Europe was awakening from the Middle Ages. By 1453, the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks blocked easy overland routes to Asia. Europeans began to search for new paths to the riches of the East. Advances in shipbuilding, the use of the compass and astrolabe, and the growing strength of centralized monarchies in Spain, Portugal, France, and England all fueled a spirit of exploration. The Renaissance encouraged curiosity, while the Reformation soon fractured religious unity, which added an urgency to overseas expansion. In Africa, powerful kingdoms like Mali and later Songhai thrived along the Niger River. Cities such as Timbuktu became centers of Islamic scholarship, while vast wealth flowed from the trade in gold and salt. Yet another trade, the trafficking of enslaved Africans across the Sahara into the Mediterranean, foreshadowed the darker Atlantic system soon to come. Thus, on the eve of 1492, three worlds, American, European, and African, stood vibrant and independent, each rich with history and culture, yet destined to collide. In 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail westward under the flag of Spain. When he landed in the Caribbean, he believed he had reached Asia, but in truth, he had stumbled into a hemisphere unknown to Europeans. His voyage was the spark of an enormous transformation. It was called the Columbian Exchange. The exchange brought dramatic consequences. From Europe came wheat, sugarcane, cattle, pigs, and horses. However, it was horses in particular that revolutionized life for many native peoples on the Great Plains. From the Americas came maize, potatoes, beans, and tomatoes, foods that would sustain population growth across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Yet along with goods came disease. Immigrants brought smallpox, measles, and influenza as it swept through indigenous communities, killing millions within decades. European powers also rushed to stake the claims of the new land. Spain, under Hernan Cortés, conquered the Aztec Empire in 1521, while Francisco Pizarro toppled the Inca in 1533. Spanish silver mines in Potosi, which is in Peru, and Zacatecas in Mexico, flooded Europe with wealth. fueling its rise as a global power. Portugal, meanwhile, colonized Brazil, covering its coast with sugar plantation worked by enslaved Africans. The Atlantic slave trade grew rapidly, beginning with the Portuguese traders in the 1400s and expanding through the 1500s. Africans were captured or sold by rival kingdoms and transported under horrible conditions across the Middle Passage. By 1650, hundreds of thousands had already been forced into labor in the Americas. Other powers joined the scramble. The French established colonies in the Caribbean and along the St. Lawrence River. The Dutch created a commercial empire centered on New Amsterdam. And the English began with failed attempts like the colony of Roanoke before founding Jamestown in 1607. Each empire pursued wealth through trade, conquest, and settlement, all tied together by the Atlantic Ocean. Religion, however, was not lost as it also traveled along those routes. Catholic missionaries like Franciscans, the Jesuits, and the Dominicans spread Christianity across the Americas, often blending it with indigenous traditions. Protestant colonists later sought religious refuge in the colonies thanks to the Reformation in Europe. This new Atlantic world was not just about geography. It was a system of people, goods, ideas, and power that reshaped four continents. As colonies matured, they developed distinct social orders. In Spanish America, society was stratified. The Peninsula's Spaniards born in Spain stood at the top, followed by Criollos, Spaniards born in the Americas, and Mestizos, mixed European and indigenous heritage. Then there came the mulattoes of European and African, and then the indigenous peoples and the enslaved Africans. It was perhaps the Catholic Church that was central, as it was the missions dotted the landscapes. As they came in through what was the Gulf of Mexico, up through Texas, and through the plains, they established, again, missions and religious festivals that began to blend the old and the New World traditions. Over in Brazil, Portuguese sugar plantations dominated. So the plantations relied on enslaved Africans, who by the 1600s made up the majority of the colony's populations. African traditions like music, religion, and language became woven into Brazilian culture. Over in America, the English colonies offered another model. In the Chesapeake, Jamestown settlers endured years of hunger and conflict before John Rolfe's cultivation of tobacco turned the colony profitable. Initially, labor came from indentured servants. These are poor Europeans who exchanged years of work for passage across the Atlantic. But by the late 1600s, enslaved Africans increasingly replaced them as colonial laws hardened racial boundaries and slavery became permanent. In New England, Puritans established communities bound by religious covenant. They founded towns, schools, and churches, emphasizing literacy so that all could read the Bible. Yet, they also clashed with native peoples, mostly tragically in what was called King Philip's War from 1675 to 1678, which devastated indigenous communities in the region. The Dutch, however, created New Amsterdam. It was a bustling commercial port before the English seized it in 1664, renaming it New York. The French, meanwhile, focused on trade with native peoples, especially in the rich fur interior of North America. Colonial societies were shaped by constant interaction. Europeans negotiating alliances and wars with native nations, enslaved Africans forging communities of resilience, settlers balancing ideals of freedom with systems of bondage. By 1700, these colonies were not merely outposts of Europe. They were unique, hybrid worlds forged from conflict, adaptation, and survival. In all, together, these three chapters tell the origin story of colonial America. First, we see vibrant, independent societies in the Americas, Europe, and Africa. Then, in the wake of 1492, we watch as they collide in a global exchange of goods, people, and ideas, an exchange that brought wealth to some and devastation to many. Finally, we witness the birth of colonial societies, diverse, contested, and unequal, but laying the foundation for the complex history of the United States to come.